Snow crunched under his boots as he walked back to his repair shop. The wind carried dust from the barren street, mixing with the sharp cold that bit through his jacket. Lights in the market had gone out early, and the few vendors still outside were packing up in silence. The whole settlement felt empty, like the night itself had swallowed the noise. He kept his head down, thinking only of the heater waiting in his small quarters. A faint movement in the alley to his left caught his eye. At first, he thought it was just a stray animal searching for scraps. Then he saw two small shapes huddled together against the wall, wrapped in rags so thin they might as well have been paper. One of them looked up. Large, dark eyes glistened in the dim light, the kind that belonged to someone used to being ignored. He took a slow step closer, and the younger one flinched, hiding her face in the other's chest. The older girl stared at him, her lips pressed tight, as if deciding whether to speak. Their skin was pale blue under the dirt, the markings along their cheeks barely visible. He recognized their species, outsiders here, unwelcome in most human sectors. He glanced around. The street was empty, no patrols nearby. "You've been out here long?" he asked. The older one didn't answer, but her arms tightened around the younger. He could see her shivering. Without another word, he pulled off his gloves and reached into his coat for the spare thermal blanket he carried for emergencies. He draped it over their shoulders. The younger one peeked out again, her lips trembling. "Hungry?" he asked, a tiny nod. He extended his hand. She hesitated, then placed her small fingers in his palm. They were ice cold. The older one followed, her eyes never leaving his face as if searching for a trick in his kindness. Inside his shop, the air was warmer. The faint hum of the heater filled the silence. He guided them to the small table in the corner, then went to the old stove in the back. A dented pot sat ready. He poured in water, added dried vegetables, and tore pieces of preserved meat from a pack. The smell rose quickly, filling the room. The younger girl leaned forward, watching every move, her nose twitching at the scent. The older one stayed rigid, scanning the room, her gaze lingering on the tools, a half-dismantled engine on the counter, and the door leading to the street. When the stew was ready, he placed 2 bowls in front of them. Steam curled into the air. The younger one grabbed hers instantly, spoon clinking against the side as she shoveled the food into her mouth. The older one picked hers up more slowly, eyes still on him, then finally took a bite. For a few minutes, there was only the sound of eating. He leaned back in his chair, pretending to check a datapad so they wouldn't feel watched. But he kept noticing how thin their wrists were, how their cheeks were hollow. The younger one finished first, setting her empty bowl down with a quiet sigh. She glanced at her sister's bowl, then at him. He smiled faintly and ladled more stew into both bowls. This time, the older one didn't hesitate. She ate faster, as if afraid the food might vanish if she took too long. He recognized the look in their eyes. It wasn't just hunger, it was survival. When they were done, he gave them a blanket each and pointed toward the small spare room in the back. "You can sleep there tonight," he said. The younger one moved immediately, but the older paused in the doorway. "Why?" she asked softly. He blinked. "Why what? Why help us?" He looked at her for a moment, then shrugged. "Because no one else would." Her gaze stayed on him for a long second before she followed her sister inside. Later, when the lights were off and the heater hummed quietly, he sat alone at the table. He wondered who they were, where they had come from, and why 2 alien children would be out in the cold on a night like this. He had no answers, only the uneasy feeling that this small act of kindness might pull him into something far larger than he could imagine. Through the thin wall, he heard the younger one's faint breathing and the older one's restless movements. Outside, the wind howled through the empty streets, but inside the shop felt different, less like a place for fixing machines and more like a shelter. He didn't know how long they'd stay, but he knew he wouldn't let them go hungry again. The morning light slipped through the cracks in the shutters, casting thin lines across the table. The heater had gone silent hours ago, and the air carried the bite of the cold outside. He rose slowly, stretching his back, and glanced toward the spare room. The door stood half open. Inside, the blankets lay crumpled on the cot, the pillows flattened, but the room was empty. He stepped in and looked around. No sound, no movement. His eyes went to the corner where he had left their boots to dry. Gone. The small blanket the younger one had clung to was neatly folded on the edge of the bed, as if she had left it there on purpose. A knot formed in his stomach. He moved quickly to the front door. The street outside was quiet, with only the wind drifting dust across the ground. No small footprints in the dirt, no sign they had walked toward the market or the port. It was as if the girls had vanished in the night. He checked behind the shop in the narrow alleys where crates and broken parts piled high. Empty. He walked toward the edge of the settlement, scanning faces in the few early risers setting up stalls. A vendor selling dried fruit shook his head when asked. Another, who sold engine filters, didn't even bother to answer. At the cargo dock, a gruff dockhand paused his work long enough to say, "No alien kids came through here this morning. Trust me, I'd remember." The man's tone carried a warning, the kind that told him not to ask more questions. He leaned against a crate, staring at the distant ships preparing for departure. The larger freighters were already lifting off, their engines kicking up storms of dust and debris. The girls could be anywhere or nowhere. As he made his way back, two traders were talking near a tavern door. He caught fragments of their conversation. "Royal convoy, ambushed weeks ago, high-value targets." The other whispered, "Two heirs, if the rumors are right, stolen, sold, or dead, no one knows." He didn't interrupt, but the words burned in his mind. Pale blue skin, delicate facial markings, the way the older one watched everything with sharp eyes. It fit too well. If they were part of that lost convoy, anyone looking for them wouldn't be asking nicely. The thought made his steps heavier. If someone had taken them again, it meant they'd been found by whoever had hunted them before. If they had left on their own, maybe they were trying to keep him out of danger. Either way, the end was the same. They were gone. Back at the shop, the stew pot still sat in the sink, the faint smell of last night's meal lingering in the air. The table where they had eaten looked almost untouched, like nothing had happened. He sat down in the same chair and stared at the spot where the younger one had rested her bowl. Hours passed. The market grew loud outside, but the sound felt distant. Every knock of tools in the shop, every hiss of a pressure valve reminded him of the silence in that spare room. As the sun lowered, a group of patrol officers passed by, their armor marked with the settlement's crest. One of them glanced into the shop, eyes narrowing, but kept walking. He turned away, suddenly aware that if they knew who had been under his roof, he might be the next one to disappear. That night, sleep didn't come easily. The wind rattled the shutters, and every creak of the floor made him think someone might be at the door. He rose more than once to check, but the street remained empty. The next morning, he went to the tavern early, hoping the traders from yesterday might return. They weren't there. Instead, an old pilot sat at the counter, nursing a drink before the day's work. When asked if he'd heard about missing alien children, the pilot gave a low chuckle. "Hear about them? I've seen the bounties. Enough credits to buy a moon if you bring them in alive." The words were meant to impress, but they only made his stomach turn. A bounty that high meant no one was safe. Not the girls, not anyone helping them. He walked out in the cold, gripping his coat tighter. The faces around him blurred into the crowd, but every so often he thought he caught a glimpse of pale blue skin. Every time he turned to look, it was just another stranger. By the time he returned to the shop, he knew the truth he didn't want to admit. The warmth of last night, the sound of their quiet eating, the small trust he had seen in their eyes, it was all over. Whatever life they had now, it was far from here, and it wasn't safe to follow. Still, he found himself setting 2 extra bowls on the shelf before closing for the night, just in case. The years rolled forward like the endless hum of a ship's engine. He changed jobs more than once, moving from small repair contracts on fringe worlds to cargo runs in asteroid belts. The settlement where he had met the 2 girls became a fading picture in his memory, yet some nights he still found himself staring at a pot of stew as if expecting them to walk in from the cold. In the port bars, in the cramped corners of space stations, rumors drifted like smoke. Traders spoke of a pair of alien women, striking and untouchable, who commanded fleets that bent entire sectors to their will. Some called them the twin comets. Others whispered they were ghosts, appearing without warning and leaving only wreckage behind. Every version of the story spoke of the same thing. No one dared cross them, and those who earned their favor prospered beyond belief. He told himself it was impossible. The two shivering children he had fed could not have turned into the feared leaders of such a fleet. Still, when the talk grew quiet and someone described the older one's sharp eyes or the younger's faint musical laugh, his chest tightened. On a mining station orbiting a dead moon, he overheard a dock crew gossiping during a shift change. "They say the twin comets once came from nothing," one said, tapping ash from his cigarette. "Slaves or beggars, depending on who you ask. But they had someone help them once, someone who gave them shelter." "Fool must have been paid well," the other muttered. The first laughed. "Or dead by now. They don't keep loose ends." He walked away before they could see the look on his face. He didn't know if their story was truth or just another port tale meant to impress new hands. But it stayed with him long after he left the mining station, riding in the silence between the rumble of engines. On the outer routes, the danger of pirates was constant. More than once, his ship had been scanned by unknown craft, shadowed for hours before the pursuers broke off. It was said the Twin Comets' fleets never took from the poor or desperate, only from those who could afford to lose. But those same fleets destroyed anyone who threatened their allies. It was an odd kind of morality in a galaxy that rarely bothered with such things. Late one cycle, while running a cargo of fuel cells through the neutral zone, he docked at a refueling hub that smelled of burnt metal and grease. The air was thick with talk of a recent battle. Someone claimed to have seen the Twin Comets' flagship there, turning an entire pirate armada to slag. The description of the ship was vivid, sleek, black as space itself, lined with gold that caught the light of distant suns. He found himself listening too closely, picturing the girls from that cold night wrapped in the glow of such a vessel. When the crowd thinned, he sat alone at a corner table, tracing the rim of his glass. It had been nearly a decade since that night, and he should have let the memory fade. But the more stories he heard, the more he felt there was something waiting for him out in the dark. The next months were restless. His work took him farther than he'd ever been, into deep sectors where comm signals crackled and even star maps grew uncertain. In one forgotten port, a merchant with mechanical eyes leaned close over the counter and whispered, "You look like someone they'd remember." "Who?" he asked. "The Comets," the merchant said, and then smiled without explaining. That night he lay in his bunk, unable to sleep. He wondered what the girls would say if they saw him now, older, more worn, carrying the weight of 100 small regrets. He wondered if they would even remember him at all, or if that warm meal had been just one kindness among many they'd seen in their rise to power. One thing was certain: wherever they were, they had changed the galaxy around them, and somewhere deep inside, he couldn't shake the thought that their story and his were still tangled, waiting for a moment when the lines would cross again. The cargo hold was quiet, except for the faint creak of metal as the ship drifted through open space. He sat at the small table in his quarters, sorting through payment records, when the comm panel gave a short, sharp ping. It wasn't a normal message tone. No voice, no priority request from the Port Authority, just a single encrypted burst of data. He frowned and tapped the screen. The encryption wasn't like anything he had seen in the standard trade networks. Lines of alien code ran across the display, characters shifting and flickering as if they were alive. At the center, a small icon blinked, 3 intersecting stars inside a dark circle. He didn't need to think long to realize it matched descriptions he'd heard in port stories. The code unraveled itself without his input, leaving only a set of coordinates. No message, no sender, no instructions. The location pointed to a remote point in deep space, far from any established trade routes, close to the edge of the neutral zone. He stared at it for a long moment. His first thought was to delete it. Only trouble waited for people who followed unknown signals. But as he sat there, the memory of a cold night years ago pushed forward, the younger girl's hand in his, the older one's steady, watchful gaze. He could almost hear the quiet clink of spoons in bowls of stew. Against his better judgment, he saved the coordinates and locked them behind a private security key. He told himself he wouldn't go. He told himself it was just a coincidence. But each day, the thought of it grew heavier, like a weight in his pocket. 3 days later, while hauling engine parts to a mining colony, his ship's long-range sensors picked up faint bursts of coded chatter. The same symbol appeared again, flashing in the corner of the screen. It wasn't aimed at him, but it was close, too close to ignore. That night in port, he asked around without giving away too much. Most dockhands shook their heads. One old spacer leaned closer and lowered his voice. That mark, if you see it twice, it's not by chance. They're calling you. The words followed him back to his quarters. He sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at the small navigation chip that now carried the coordinates. If he followed them, he might find nothing. Or he might find the truth behind a decade of questions. The next morning, he filed a false destination with the station's registry, claiming he was delivering salvage to an outpost 2 sectors away. Once clear of the station's sensors, he adjusted the course and engaged the drive toward the hidden point in space. The journey was long and quiet. He passed through empty sectors where even automated beacons had gone dark. His ship felt smaller with each jump, the hum of the engine steady but somehow tense, as if the metal itself sensed where it was going. On the final approach, the stars outside shifted, their light bending in strange patterns. His console lit with proximity warnings, but no ships appeared on the scanners. Then, without warning, the black of space ahead rippled, and a massive vessel emerged as if from nowhere. It was unlike anything he had seen before, sleek and angular, its hull the color of deep shadow, edges lined with faint gold light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The size dwarfed his ship completely, and the air around it shimmered with the heat of active shielding. A voice came through the calm but carrying an edge of command. Power down your engines and prepare for docking. He hesitated, fingers hovering over the controls. Identify yourself, he said. Silence followed, then the same voice, softer this time. You already know who we are. A docking bay on the side of the massive ship opened, glowing with pale blue light. His ship was pulled gently forward by a force that overrode his own controls. Inside the bay, the floor gleamed as if it had never seen dirt or oil. Figures in polished armor stood in formation, their faces hidden behind mirrored visors. At the far end, 2 taller figures stepped forward. They moved with a perfect, practiced grace that spoke of years of discipline. One reached up and removed her helmet. Her hair spilled free, silver with a faint blue sheen, and her eyes locked on his. In that moment, the years fell away, and he saw the same sharp gaze that had studied him from across a small table over bowls of hot stew. The sound of his boots echoed in the vast docking bay as he stepped down the ramp. The armored soldiers remained still, watching him without a word. The taller woman walked forward, stopping only a few paces away. Her eyes softened for a moment before she glanced to her right. The second figure removed her helmet, revealing a younger face framed by dark hair streaked with silver. Her smile was small but real, the same smile he had seen when a warm meal had been placed in front of her long ago. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The older one broke the silence. You haven't changed as much as I thought you would, she said, her voice calm but edged with something deeper. The younger one stepped closer, studying him as if to confirm he was real. It is him, she said quietly, almost to herself. He let out a slow breath. It's been a long time. Yes, the older replied. 10 years. She glanced over her shoulder, and the soldiers in the bay turned sharply, marching out through the side doors until the 3 of them were alone. She gestured for him to follow. They led him through polished corridors that curved like the inside of a great shell, lights casting soft gold across the walls. Every surface was immaculate, every turn guarded by silent sentries. They moved without hesitation, clearly knowing where they were taking him. The path ended at a large chamber with tall windows showing the endless black of space. In the center stood a table set with food and drink. Real food, not the processed packs he was used to. The smell was rich, reminding him of the stew from that night so long ago. The younger one motioned for him to sit. We never forgot, she said. Not the cold, not the hunger, and not you. He looked between them. I thought you were gone the next morning. I searched. We had to leave, the older one said. If we had stayed, you would be dead now. The people who hunted us were already close. You gave us 1 night of safety. That was enough to keep us alive until we could escape completely. The younger one leaned forward. You didn't ask for payment. You didn't demand answers. You just gave. No one else ever did that for us. He shook his head slowly. Anyone would have. No, the older interrupted. Not anyone. Not there. Not then. Silence settled for a moment, broken only by the soft hum of the ship's systems. Then the younger one smiled faintly. We've come to repay you, he frowned. Repay me? She gestured toward the window. Outside, small lights moved across the dark. Ships, dozens of them, flying in tight formation. Every vessel out there answers to us. Every crew owes us loyalty. We can give you wealth, a world, a fleet of your own, or we can give you vengeance if you have enemies. He leaned back, feeling the weight of her words. I don't want power. I'm not looking for revenge. The older one's expression softened. Then perhaps you want safety. We can make sure no one touches you or your home ever again. He looked out at the fleet, their sleek shapes gliding like predators in the dark. For years he had scraped by in the quiet corners of the galaxy, surviving but never belonging. Now, in front of him, stood two people who owed him everything and could change his life in an instant. I'm not sure what I want, he admitted. The younger one's smile widened slightly. Then we will give you time to think. But know this, whatever you choose, we will make it happen. They spoke for hours, sharing pieces of the years they had lived apart. They told him of the escape from the convoy, the years spent under false names, the alliances forged in blood and flood and fire until they commanded a fleet feared across star systems. He told them of the quiet life he had built, the jobs that kept him moving, but never satisfied. When the meal was over, the older one stood. Rest here tonight, we will speak again tomorrow. As they left him in a guest chamber larger than his entire ship, he looked out at the stars beyond the window. For the first time in years, he felt something he couldn't name, like the night might lead to more than just another morning. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the ship's systems. He lay on the wide bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying their words again and again. The offer had been clear. They could give him anything: safety, wealth, power. Yet it didn't feel like a business deal. There had been something else in their eyes, something heavier than simple gratitude. Sleep came in short bursts, broken by dreams of cold streets and quiet laughter over a bowl of stew. When the soft chime at the door sounded, he was already awake. The younger one stood outside, wearing light armor instead of the formal robes she'd worn before. Come with me, she said simply. They walked through empty corridors lit by the pale glow of running lights. Most of the crew seemed to be elsewhere, the usual echo of boots on metal absent. She led him to a smaller observation deck that jutted out from the side of the ship, its curved glass showing a sea of stars. This was our first ship, she said, resting a hand on the railing. It was old, slow, falling apart, but it was ours. We built everything else from this. He looked at her in the reflection. You've come a long way. Her gaze shifted to him. Because of you. He shook his head. You did that yourselves. Her lips curved in a faint smile. You don't understand. That night, no one had ever treated us like we were worth saving. You didn't see two fugitives. You saw two children who needed warmth. You gave without expecting anything. That kind of kindness changes you. Before he could answer, the door behind them opened and the older one entered. Her presence filled the room in a way that had nothing to do with rank or title. She looked between them before stepping closer. There is something you should know, she said. We didn't just come to repay you. We came because you may be in danger. His brow furrowed. From who? From the same people who hunted us, she said. They are still out there. They have seen what we've become, and they want to destroy us. They've learned of you, your name, your ship. They will see you as a way to get to us. He exhaled slowly, the weight of her words settling in. So bringing me here wasn't just to thank me. It was to protect you, the younger one said. The older's voice softened. We can keep you hidden, or we can make it so no one dares touch you again. The choice is yours. He turned back to the stars, watching the slow drift of distant lights. If I stay, what happens? You become one of us, she said. You'll have our mark. Every ally we have will be your ally. Every enemy will think twice before they even speak your name. And if I go, then we cannot promise you will be safe. The silence that followed was deep, filled only by the low hum of the ship. Finally, he spoke. I've spent years alone, moving from place to place, no one to watch my back. Maybe it's time that changed. The younger one's smile was small but genuine. The older gave a single nod. Then it settled. They spent the next hours showing him more of the ship. The training decks, the war rooms where battle plans were shaped, the private quarters reserved for those closest to the commanders. Everywhere they went, crew members moved aside, bowing slightly in respect to the two women. When they passed through the command bridge, the view of the fleet spread before them. Dozens of ships formed a perfect formation, their dark hulls gleaming under distant starlight. The sight stirred something in him, an understanding that this was no scattered band of raiders, but an empire in motion. That night he dined with them again, this time in a smaller room with no guards at the door. They spoke more freely, sharing fragments of the past they had never told anyone else. Laughter came easier, and the air between them felt less like a gulf of years and more like an unbroken thread. When the meal ended, the older one looked at him seriously. "From this day forward, you are under our banner. Whatever comes, we stand together." He met her gaze and nodded. For the first time in years, he felt the unfamiliar warmth of belonging. The alarm began as a low pulse through the floor, a vibration that grew into a sharp, repeating tone. He was halfway to the door before it opened on its own, revealing a crew member in black armor. "Commanders request you on the bridge. Now." He followed at a run, the corridor lights shifting from gold to red. The hum of the engines deepened, joined by the faint tremor of weapons powering up. When he stepped onto the bridge, both sisters were already at the central console, their eyes locked on the tactical display. A cluster of hostile ships burned bright on the screen, moving fast toward the fleet. They were sleek, armed, and many. The older sister's voice was calm but cold. "Pirate mercenaries, paid by the same people who hunted us before." The younger one glanced at him. "They came for you. They think taking you will break us." He gripped the edge of the console. "What's the plan?" Her smile was sharp. "We show them their mistake." Orders flew across the bridge, crew moving with practiced precision. The fleet shifted formation, shielding the flagship with heavy cruisers while smaller, faster ships looped out to flank the enemy. Through the massive viewing glass, he saw the dark void ahead flare with engine light as both sides closed the distance. The first exchange lit the darkness in bursts of gold and red. The deck under his feet shuddered with the impact of returning fire. The younger sister moved to the weapons station, her hands flying over the controls, targeting the enemy's lead ship. The older one stood beside him. "You saved our lives when we had nothing. Now we save yours, and we end this once and for all." An explosion bloomed in the distance as one of the hostile ships broke apart. The rest pressed closer, weaving through the fleet's defenses. His pulse quickened as alarms screamed, but the sisters moved with unshaken focus. The younger called out, "Mark 275, heavy fire." The flagship's forward cannons unleashed a volley that tore through an enemy frigate, sending it spinning into the void. Fighters streaked past the glass, their trails vanishing into the dark as they chased down the last wave. Minutes stretched like hours until the final hostile vessel exploded in a spray of light and debris. The bridge fell into silence except for the steady hum of the ship's systems. The red lights faded back to gold. The younger sister exhaled slowly, turning from the weapons console with a grin. "They won't be back." The older one looked at him, her voice steady. "No one will ever touch you now, not while we live." He felt a weight lift from his chest, though another replaced it. The knowledge that their protection came with a bond stronger than any contract. "I owe you more than I can repay," he said quietly. The younger shook her head. "Debt doesn't exist between us anymore. We are family." They left the bridge together, the crew watching them pass with silent respect. The corridors no longer felt like unfamiliar tunnels of metal, but something closer to home. In the dining hall, a table was already set, the scent of freshly cooked food filling the air. They ate without rush, the conversation easy. The older one spoke of future plans, expanding the fleet's reach, securing trade routes, strengthening alliances. The younger teased him about learning to fly one of their smaller ships. By the end of the meal, the tension of battle had faded, replaced by a quiet certainty. The galaxy outside was still dangerous, still unpredictable, but he would never face it alone again. Later, standing at the observation deck, he watched the fleet glide through the endless black. The sisters joined him, one on each side, their reflections clear in the glass. The The younger rested a hand on his arm. The older stood close enough for her presence to be steadying without a word. Somewhere far behind them, the life he had known, small, solitary, and fragile, was gone. Ahead stretched a future tied to two people whose lives had once brushed his for only a single night, but who now stood with him as if they had always been there. For the first time in 10 years, he let himself believe that maybe this was where he was meant to be.